Oh,
Are you ready? Alright.
Yeah.
And...
Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men.
This is the actions of a Russian government, authoritarian government.
You have the love of humanity in your hearts. You don't hate, only the unloved. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
They say there are two sides to every story, and we should perhaps consider both before we form our opinion. Look at the conflict in Ukraine, for example. One side is dominating the global narrative, while the other has been proclaimed the villain. No doubt there's a solid case against Russia, and there's no doubt the Australian freedom movement has a bunch of cookers in it.
Okay, a government is basically a glorified shopping mall.
What?
Now the tough part is discerning the real information from the misinformation. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, "The objective of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding yourself in the ranks of the insane." Is Putin insane? Is Biden the majority? Let's break down this conflict. Vladimir Putin's aggression should be called out. There's no doubt about it. Invading a sovereign country cannot be justified. However, what led the Russians to the point of this invasion? Did the Russians have a valid reason besides what the mainstream media is proclaiming? Let's see. Leaders in Moscow say they are the victims of NATO's eastward expansion, and they're only acting in a self-defense. Carl Von once said, "The best form of defense is attack." Here's why this quote could align with Putin's actions. Over the past couple of decades, NATO has been creeping closer to the Russian border. Former Soviet states have become NATO members. This military alliance has technically absorbed the entire security belt of Russia. Russia sees this expansion as a provocateur. They see a breach in their security interests that won't end well for them. This is as simple as NATO promised they wouldn't move an inch to the east after the Warsaw Pact in 1995. And they did. Now Moscow's concerns kept proceeding with new rounds of NATO expansions until things literally blew up in Ukraine. Russia is proclaiming the security of its nation via denazification of Ukraine. Yep, you thought the Russians were the Nazis. Well, it's not. It's the Ukrainians, allegedly, by Putin.
Еще раз обращаюсь к военнослужащим вооруженных сил Украины. Не позволяйте неонацистам и бендеровцам использовать ваших детей, ваших жен и стариков в качестве живого щита. Берите власть в свои руки. Похоже, нам с вами будет легче договориться, чем с этой шайкой наркоманов и неонацистов, которая засела в Киеве и взяла в заложники весь украинский народ.
Putin claims that there was a mistreatment of Eastern Ukrainians who are Russian Ukrainians, and that this mistreatment began around 8 years ago. Talk about holding a grudge. Hey! You hit my friend. When did I do that? 8 years ago. Oh, hence why the beginning of this war didn't really surprise me. In fact, it seemed a little overdue. What surprised me the most was the fact that people knew nothing about the suffering these Ukrainians had endured over the last 8 years under a corrupt Ukrainian government. I mean, if you think this comedian can't be bought with a bag of Coke and a Vicks pen, you're truly mistaken, my friend. Vladimir Putin addressed the annual Munich conference where he said, and I'm quoting, NATO has put its frontline forces on our borders. This expansion represents a serious provocation that endures the level of mutual trust, and we have the right to ask against whom this expansion is intended. And what happened to the assurance our Western partners made after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact? These sentiments have been echoed by a host of American strategists. I'll give you a few. For example, June 1997, 50 prominent policy experts signed an open letter to President Bill Clinton at the time, calling American efforts to expand NATO a policy error of historic proportions. Then we have George Kennan, the father of the American containment policy during the Cold War. He too called NATO expansion a strategic mistake. The warnings went on for decades. Some would say that the US and NATO pushed Ukraine into this war. Or others would say that NATO are the knight in shining armor. I'll leave that for you to decide. But whilst you do, let's take a look at a few things NATO has done over the years.
NATO began a massive air bombing
Sometimes
campaign.
these bombs, they look like fireworks because there's so many of them.
Zone koje su upravo označile vazdušnu opasnost pozivaju da se uputite u skloništa.
There is a hospital over there, which was also bombed, and the joint stuff. And I remember, for example, that tall building over there, it was bombed so we could see right through it. It's quite close to this place where we stand now, which is the historical site of Serbia.
So a major European city was being bombed right in the heart of the city. It's so hard for me to imagine that so few Americans knew what was going on. That even now, 15 years on, I don't think many Americans could point out where Serbia is on the map or answer why we bombed you.
Da ne prihvati prisustvo stranih trupa na našoj teritoriji.
Today, our armed forces joined our NATO allies in airstrikes against Serbian forces.
In 1999, NATO gladly bombed Yugoslavia under the pretense of potential genocide. Did they bomb just military installations? No. NATO destroyed schools, hospitals, bridges, cultural monuments, private businesses, and industrial plants. Have people forgotten about this? Possibly? Have people forgotten how NATO pumped money and weapons into Georgia right before Georgia bombarded Russian peacekeepers and civilians? Hey, maybe they did. Maybe they did. Maybe they even forgot about the invasion of Libya, Iraq, Syria. Easy to forget if you weren't there, eh? For the little virtue signalists that have changed their profile avatar to the season of the media, did you protest the illegal invasion of Syria by Turkey and the US? I hope you did. Have you protested against Arabia starving of Yemen? I hope you did. Now for a more topical question. Where were your reptile tears, mate, when Kiev started bombarding Ukrainian Russians in the east simply for doing what Ukrainians were doing to its own people in the west? Where were your reptile tears when Kiev went ahead and cut off the water and electricity supply to the people of Crimea? Where were those same reptile tears in 2014 when neo-Nazi groups circled anti-Maidan protesters and barricaded them in a union building and set the building ablaze with petrol bombs? 50 people burnt alive and others jumped to their death. I'm sure you were protesting about it. The US and its allies have been pumping billions of dollars worth of lethal weapons into Ukraine for over 8 years now. And the Ukrainian government has not only been waging war on its own people, but the Russian government have been warning Kiev for 8 years, and it must stop killing Russian civilians, especially Russian children in Donbass, claiming that basic human rights of Russians in Ukraine must be respected. However, no one in Kiev wanted to hear. Neither did we. So whilst leaders like Scott Morrison, Jacinta Ardern, Joe Biden, Macron, that fat pig in the UK, have been virtue signaling, they have also been pushing Ukrainians into an inevitable proxy conflict with a country who has their backs turned against the wall as enemies enter their doorsteps. So, if you haven't been following this conflict from day one, don't worry, a lot of people haven't. Just don't be too quick to pick a side. Or, most importantly, do you have to pick a side? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and in an interest of love, send this to someone you hate. Peace in the Far East. Ciao.